Either way, it had found them. For a long moment, there was silence. The coyote stood frozen, considering its options. Ethan clutched the fabric of his shirt, trying to make himself as small as possible. Then Maximus took a step forward. The change was immediate. The once calm shepherd now stood tall and imposing, his entire body rigid, his stance firm. His deep chest expanded as he let out a low, rumbling growl, a warning. The other K9s followed suit, each one stepping in sync, their hackles raised, their eyes locked on the coyote. Their growls filled the air, a sound so primal and united that the coyote instantly recoiled. Ethan had never seen anything like it. It was as if the dogs had formed an impenetrable wall, standing between him and the wild animal. They weren't just protecting him. They were claiming the space as their own. The coyote lowered its head, ears flat, tail twitching nervously. It hesitated for a second too long. Then Maximus barked. The sound was sharp, powerful, and full of authority. The coyote yelped and bolted back into the forest, disappearing into the underbrush. Silence fell again, save for the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. Ethan let out the breath he had been holding. The K9s didn't move at first. They remained in their protective stance, ensuring the threat was truly gone. Slowly, Maximus turned to look at Ethan. The moment their eyes met, the boy understood exactly what had just happened. They had protected him. A small smile flickered on Ethan's lips. His tiny fingers reached out and gently touched Maximus's thick fur. The big shepherd let out a short huff, almost like a satisfied sigh, before finally relaxing. Ethan looked at the other dogs, each one standing tall, watching over him. "Thank you," he whispered. Maximus gave a short wag of his tail, then turned his head toward the road, as if reminding him his mother was still looking for him. Determined now. Ethan picked up his pace, his little legs moving as fast as they could. The K9s matched his speed effortlessly, still keeping him in formation. Their disciplined movements ensured that nothing else could get close to him. Then, after a few minutes, a voice pierced the air. "Ethan!" His mother's voice. Ethan gasped. "Mommy!" He cried out, sprinting forward through the trees. A figure emerged, a woman with frantic eyes and tear-streaked cheeks, running toward him. Ethan didn't hesitate. He threw himself into her arms, his small body shaking as he sobbed against her chest. "Oh my God!" she whispered, hugging him tightly. "I was so scared. I thought I lost you." Ethan pulled back just enough to look at her. "The dogs!" He sniffled, pulling behind him. "They helped me." His mother, confused, turned her gaze toward the road, and there they stood, the K9 German shepherds perfectly aligned, watching them. Her breath caught in her throat. The dogs made no move to approach. They had done their job. Then, as if they had silently agreed that the mission was complete, Maximus let out a soft bark, and the entire pack turned and trotted away, disappearing into the night. Ethan and his mother watched in stunned silence. "They saved me," Ethan whispered, wiping his tears. His mother, still overwhelmed, nodded slowly. "I think they were meant to find you." She held him tighter, tears of relief falling down her cheeks. But one question lingered in the back of her mind. Where had the K9s come from, and why did it feel like they had appeared exactly when her son needed them most? What happened next would answer everything. Ethan clung to his mother as his small body trembled against hers. Relief washed over him like a warm wave, but his mind was still spinning. The K9 German shepherds had protected him. They had led him back, and now, just as mysteriously as they had appeared, they were gone. His mother, Emily Carter, stroked his hair, pressing gentle kisses onto his forehead. Her heart was still racing, but the moment she laid eyes on him, the terror that had consumed her for hours had melted away. "You're safe," she whispered, tightening her grip around his little frame. "That's all that matters." Ethan sniffled and wiped his nose against her shirt. "Mommy, did you see them?" he asked, his voice small. "The dogs." Emily pulled back slightly, cupping his face with both hands. "I saw them, sweetheart, but where did they come from?" Ethan turned his head toward the empty road. The shepherds had vanished into the night, but their presence still lingered as if they had never truly left. "I don't know," he admitted, "but they helped me." Emily let out a shaky breath and nodded. Come on, let's get you home. She scooped him up in her arms and carried him back toward their SUV, which was parked a few yards away on the gravel road. The headlights shone into the forest, illuminating the thick trees that lined both sides of the road. Somewhere in those shadows, the K9S were still out there, watching. Perhaps, as she strapped Ethan into a seat, she glanced into the darkness one last time. Then, with a final exhale, she climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. But as she turned onto the main road, leading back to town, something unexpected happened. Ethan gasped, pointing toward the rear window. "Mommy, look." Emily glanced at the rearview mirror and felt her breath catch. The K9S were following them. Their dark, sleek bodies moved in perfect unison, their powerful strides keeping pace with the car. Maximus, the leader, led the way, his piercing eyes locked on the road ahead. A chill ran down Emily's spine, but it wasn't fear, it was awe. "These aren't normal dogs," she muttered under her breath. Ethan turned in his seat, watching them with wide eyes. "Do you think they want us to follow them?" Emily wasn't sure, but something inside her told her to trust them. She slowed the car slightly, watching as the shepherds veered off the road, disappearing behind an old abandoned police station on the outskirts of town. Her hands tightened on the wheel. That station had been closed for years. Curiosity burned inside her, and before she could second-guess herself, she turned the car onto the narrow dirt path leading toward the building. Ethan's excitement grew. "Mommy, I think they want us to see something." Emily wasn't so sure, but she kept driving until she reached the front of the neglected structure. The building was still standing, but its once proud K9 unit headquarters sign was faded and weathered. As soon as she parked, Ethan fumbled with the seatbelt, eager to get out. "Wait," Emily warned, holding him back. They both looked ahead. The K9S stood at the entrance of the abandoned station, waiting for them. Emily swallowed hard. Why had they led her here, and what were they trying to show her? She took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, holding Ethan's hand tightly. What happened next would change everything. Emily's heart pounded as she stepped out of the car, her fingers wrapped tightly around Ethan's small hand. A group of K9 German shepherds surrounds a crying child on the road. What happens next is surprising. A child, lost and crying on a deserted road with no one around to help, is suddenly surrounded by a group of K9 German shepherds. Were they a threat, or was fate working in an unexpected way? What happened next left even the most experienced officers in disbelief. Stay until the end. This story will change the way you see courage and loyalty forever. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories like this one. Now, let's dive into this unbelievable tale. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the quiet rural road. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine trees from the nearby forest. It should have been a peaceful evening, but for one small child, it was anything but. 6-year-old Ethan Carter sat on the ground near the roadside, his tiny body trembling as sobs racked his chest. His jeans were torn at the knees, and his hands were scraped from where he had tripped while running. He had wandered too far from home chasing after Butterfly, and now he had no idea how to get back. His little heart pounded with fear. He had called for his mother, but no one had answered. The road stretched endlessly in both directions, and aside from the occasional rustle of leaves, it was eerily silent. He hugged his arms around his small frame, trying to stay calm, but fresh tears streamed down his cheeks. Then suddenly, there was movement. A rustling sound came from the trees, followed by the distinct sound of heavy paws padding against the dirt road. Ethan's breath hitched as he turned toward the noise. His wide, tear-filled eyes locked onto the figures emerging from the shadows. A group of K9 German shepherds stepped onto the road, their powerful bodies moving in perfect synchronization. Their coats gleamed under fading sunlight, and their eyes were sharp and alert. They weren't wild dogs. They were trained police canines, wearing collars marked with official insignias. Ethan's breath came in short gasps as the dogs circled around him, forming a protective barrier. His small fingers dug into the dirt as he instinctively shrank back. Were they going to hurt him? The largest of the group, a striking black and tan shepherd with an imposing stance, took a step closer. His ears pricked forward, eyes scanning the boy carefully. His name, Maximus, was engraved on the metal tag hanging from his collar. He was a leader of this K-9 unit and had been trained to assess situations instantly. Ethan let out a small whimper, frozen in place. His young mind didn't know what to do. These weren't ordinary dogs. They were trained to take down criminals and detect danger. But why were they here, surrounding him? Maximus let out a low, steady breath through his nose, sniffing the air. The other dogs remained perfectly still, watching him for direction. Then slowly, Maximus lowered his massive head and nudged Ethan's shoulder with his nose. Ethan flinched at first, but soon realized the dog wasn't attacking him. Another shepherd, a lighter-colored one with a deep scar near his ear, let out a soft whine. He stepped closer, sniffing the child's scraped hands, his tail giving the slightest wag. The realization hit Ethan. They weren't here to hurt him. They were trying to help. His tears slowed as he stared into the intelligent eyes of the dogs around him. Maximus nudged him again, more insistently this time, as if encouraging him to stand. Ethan sniffled and wiped his nose on his sleeve. "Do you know where my mom is?" he asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Of course. The dogs couldn't answer, but Maximus turned his head toward the road, then back to Ethan, as if gesturing for him to follow. Then, as if by some invisible command, the shepherds repositioned themselves, two standing ahead of Ethan, two behind, and Maximus staying right beside him. It was clear now. They were leading him somewhere. Ethan hesitated for a moment, but something in the way the dogs moved and their calm presence made him feel safe. With a deep breath, he wiped the last of his tears and slowly stood up. As soon as he did, Maximus let out a short, sharp bark, one that echoed into the distance. Then, in the far distance, came a reply, a human voice shouting his name. Ethan's eyes widened. That was his mother's voice. The K-9S had done more than just find him. They had called for help. With renewed hope, Ethan took his first step forward, surrounded by his unexpected rescuers. What happened next would shock everyone. Ethan's heart pounded as he heard his mother's voice in the distance. It was faint but unmistakable. He turned toward the sound, his small hands trembling. The group of K-9 German shepherds around him remained still, their eyes locked on him as if waiting for his next move. Maximus, the leader of the pack, gave him another gentle nudge. His dark brown eyes were filled with something Ethan could only describe as reassurance. The other dogs stood firm, their ears flicking at every noise in the forest, alert to any possible danger. The little boy sniffled and wiped his face with his sleeve. He had been so afraid just moments ago, lost and alone on this quiet road. But now, surrounded by these powerful yet gentle creatures, something deep inside told him he was safe. With a deep breath, Ethan took a small step forward. The moment he did, the German shepherds moved in perfect synchronization, forming a protective barrier around him. Two walked ahead, two followed behind, and Maximus stayed close to the side. It was as if they had silently agreed they would guide him home. The boy's tiny feet shuffled on the gravel as he tried to walk faster. He didn't know how long he had been lost, but the fading sunlight told him it had been too long. He needed to get back before it got dark. As they moved down the road, the shepherds kept a tight formation. Their ears twitched at every rustling branch and distant bird call. Ethan noticed how disciplined they were. Not one dog ran ahead. Not one strayed too far. It was almost like they had done this before. Then suddenly, one of the dogs growled. Ethan froze, his eyes darting around, trying to see what made the dog react. Maximus stiffened, his body tense. His sharp gaze locked on the trees lining the road. His ears pointed forward, completely focused. The other shepherds followed his lead, their muscles coiled like springs, ready to act. Ethan's breath hitched. Was there something in the forest? A twig snapped, and the little boy's heart nearly stopped. Then movement. A dark shape emerged from the trees, stepping onto the road. Ethan gasped, stumbling backward. It was a coyote. The animal was thin, its fur ragged, and its yellow eyes were scanning the scene. It had probably been drawn by Ethan's scent, or maybe it had heard him crying earlier. "I don't know," he admitted. "I never thought I'd see them again. I thought they wouldn't have survived." Ethan, standing beside his mother, took a cautious step forward. They did, he said, his voice small but certain. They stayed together. They took care of each other. The man's gaze flickered to the little boy, his eyes softening. Yeah, he murmured. They did. Emily took a deep breath. You were their handler? The man nodded. James Parker, former K-9 unit sergeant. I trained every single one of them, his voice thick with emotion. When the department shut down the unit, they were supposed to be rehomed. But things didn't go as planned. I had to transfer out of state, and before I could make arrangements, they were just gone. He exhaled heavily. I looked for them for years. No one knew where they went. Emily's chest tightened. They never left, she whispered. They stayed here. They protected this place. James closed his eyes briefly, his hands tightening around Maximus's fur. Of course they did, he murmured, because that's who they are. For years, these dogs had lived in the shadows, guarding a place that had long been abandoned. They had survived on instinct, loyalty, and each other. But now, their past had finally found them. Ethan looked up at his mother. Can they come home with us? Emily hesitated. She had no idea what the future held for these dogs. They had been left behind once. She couldn't let it happen again. James stood slowly, his gaze sweeping over the shepherds. They were still mine, he said, his voice steady now, filled with resolve. They deserve a real home. He turned to Emily. I don't have much left these days, but I have land. A big property just outside of town. Enough space for all of them. Enough for them to live out their lives the way they should have. Emily felt her breath hitch. You want to take them? James nodded. I trained them. I love them. They were never just dogs to me. His eyes softened. They were my family. Ethan's face lit up. So they get to stay together? James looked down at Maximus, who was still pressed against his side. Yeah, kid, they stay together. Emily felt warmth spread through her chest. This was how it was meant to be. The shepherds had been waiting for him, and now they were finally going home. The decision was made. The K-9 German shepherds, who had been forgotten for years, would finally have a home again. James Parker stood among them, his hands still resting on Maximus's fur, his expression filled with quiet determination. Emily felt an overwhelming sense of relief. They wouldn't be left behind again. Ethan bounced on his heels, excitement lighting up his young face. Can we help take them there? He asked eagerly. James gave him a small smile. It won't be easy. They've been on their own for a long time. But if they still trust me, then yeah, we can take them home tonight. Emily looked around at the canines, their disciplined yet weary bodies still standing tall. Will they follow you? James exhaled, then crouched to Maximus's level, gently taking the dog's face in his hands. Max, he murmured, it's time to go home, boy. You ready? Maximus held his gaze for a long moment. Then slowly he wagged his tail. The other shepherds seemed to sense the shift immediately. Their ears perked up, their bodies relaxing slightly. One by one, they moved closer to James, pressing their heads against him, recognizing him not as a stranger, but as their leader. Ethan giggled as one of them nudged his shoulder. I think they're ready. James stood, his heart full. All right, then, he said, let's get them out of here. The walk back to the cars felt surreal. The shepherds followed closely, their steps synchronized just as they had always been trained. Even after years of surviving alone, they had never lost their instinct to follow their handler. Emily's SUV wasn't big enough for all of them, but James had his own truck parked nearby. One by one, the dogs climbed in, settling in the back as if they already knew this was where they belonged. Ethan watched with awe. It's like they remember everything. James gave a small chuckle. That's because they do. As he secured the last dog into the truck, James turned to Emily. Thank you, he said sincerely. If you hadn't followed them tonight, I might never have found them. Emily smiled, feeling the weight of the night lift. I think they found you first. James nodded, looking at the dogs in the truck bed, his heart swelling. Yeah, he murmured. I think you're right. With one last glance at the abandoned station, the place these shepherds had called home for so long, James climbed into the driver's seat. As the engine rumbled to life, Emily looked over at Ethan, who was beaming. "They're going to be happy now," he said confidently. Emily ruffled his hair. "Yeah, sweetheart, they are." As they drove away, the once forgotten K9S finally heading toward the home they had always deserved. Emily knew this was only the beginning of their new story. They had waited, and now they were home. The drive to James Parker's property was quiet, the kind of peaceful silence that follows after something truly life-changing. In the back of the truck, the K9 German shepherds rested, their bodies pressed close together as if still in disbelief that they were finally heading somewhere safe. Ethan sat in the back seat of Emily's SUV, his eyes bright with excitement. "Mommy, do you think they know they're going home?" Emily glanced at the rearview mirror, watching the truck ahead. Maximus sat at the edge, his head high, ears alert, eyes locked on the road, as if he were leading the way home himself. "I think they've always known where home was," she said softly. "They just needed someone to take them back." 30 minutes later, they arrived. James's property was vast, acres of open land, rolling fields, and a large, well-maintained barn that had been converted into a working K9 training facility. A few outdoor kennels stood near the main house, but unlike the abandoned station, this place was alive. It wasn't just a shelter, it was a sanctuary. James pulled his truck up near the main fence and stepped out, walking around to open the back. "All right, boys," he murmured. "We're here." Maximus was the first to jump down, his paws landing softly in the grass. The others followed, sniffing the air, taking the place that would now be theirs. Ethan ran up beside James, eyes wide. Will they stay here forever? James looked down at him, then at the shepherds, who were already trotting toward the open field, their tails wagging. "For the first time in years, they'll stay as long as they want," he said. "They've earned that much." Emily placed a hand on her heart, watching as Maximus turned to look at James one last time. Then, with complete trust, the massive shepherd laid down at James's feet. Ethan grinned. He knows he's home. James knelt, running a hand over the dog's thick fur. "Yeah," he whispered. "They all do." Emily felt tears prick her eyes as the rest of the shepherds settled into their new home, running, playing, and simply being dogs again. They had waited for so long, but now, finally, they were home. The K9 German shepherds stood motionless at the entrance of the abandoned K9 unit headquarters, their sharp eyes locked on her as if waiting for her next move. The night air was cool, carrying a faint scent of damp earth and old wood. The once proud police station stood before them, its walls weathered by time, its sign faded and cracked. Emily hesitated. Why had they let her here? Ethan tugged on her hand, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Mommy, we have to go inside." Emily glanced down at him, torn between logic and an unshakable feeling deep in her gut. The dogs had saved her son. They weren't leading them into danger. Taking a deep breath, she gave Ethan a reassuring squeeze and took a step forward. The gravel crunched under her feet as they approached the entrance. The shepherds, still perfectly disciplined, stepped aside, allowing them to pass. Maximus, the largest of the pack, let out a low huff, his tail swishing once against the cracked pavement. It wasn't a warning. It was encouragement. Emily reached for the door handle, expecting it to be locked. It wasn't. With a soft creak, the heavy door swung inward, revealing darkness. Ethan clutched her leg, suddenly unsure. "It's scary in there," he whispered. Emily placed a protective hand on his head. "Stay close to me, okay?" The K9S followed them in, their paws silent against the dusty floor. As Emily stepped inside, her phone's flashlight illuminated the forgotten remains of a once thriving police K9 unit. Filing cabinets stood open, their contents scattered. Dust-covered training manuals lay abandoned on desks. Faint outlines of where pictures once hung were visible on the peeling walls. But what caught Emily's attention was the row of old kennels against the far wall. Some of the metal doors hung open, rusted from years of neglect. Others remained tightly shut, their locks broken. Ethan took a cautious step forward, peering into one of the empty enclosures. "Mommy, do you think this is where they lived?" Emily swallowed hard. "I think so." The realization hit her like a wave. These weren't just any German shepherds. They had belonged to this unit. They had been left behind. She turned to look at the dog standing behind her. Maximus met her gaze, his deep brown eyes filled with something that sent shivers down her spine. Not just intelligence, but history. These dogs had once been part of something greater. They had served, protected, and worked alongside officers. But when the station shut down, they had been forgotten. Yet somehow they had survived. Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. "Oh my God," she whispered. Ethan crouched next to one of the kennels, brushing dust off an old nameplate. "Maximus," he read aloud, looking up at the massive dog. His eyes widened. "Mommy, that's his name." Emily's breath hitched. Her gaze darted to the other kennels. Her fingers traced the nameplates. Zeus Titan, Rex Shadow, Juno. All names belonging to the shepherd standing in front of them. It wasn't a coincidence. They had led her and Ethan here for a reason. Maximus stepped forward, placing his large paw against the side of the kennel. Ethan was looking at his deep eyes, held in emotion. Emily could barely process it. He remembered. He knew this place. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. "You never left, did you?" she whispered. The shepherds had survived on their own for years, patrolling these grounds, protecting what was once their home. And tonight, they had found someone to trust again. Ethan reached out, running his small fingers through Maximus's fur. "You were waiting for someone to come back," he said softly. Maximus lowered his head and pressed it gently against the boy's shoulder, a silent confirmation. Emily wiped a tear from her cheek. She had been led here for a reason. These dogs weren't just strays. They were guardians forgotten by time. She took a shaky breath. "We can't leave them here." Ethan looked up at her, his eyes full of hope. "Can we help them?" Before Emily could answer, the sound of tires crunching over gravel made her spin around. Headlights flooded through the broken windows. A vehicle had pulled into the lot. Emily's heartbeat quickened. Who else would be out here at this hour? The shepherds turned in unison, their ears perked up. A door slammed shut, then a voice, a deep, commanding voice, that froze Maximus in place. "Max!" Emily turned just in time to see a man step into the doorway. His silhouette was tall and broad, and as he stepped further into the dim light, she could see his face, rugged, lined with years of experience, and filled with shock. His gaze swept over the shepherds, landing on Maximus. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. "Maximus," he said again, his voice breaking slightly. The massive dog whimpered. Then, in a flash of movement, he ran toward the man. Emily gasped as the other shepherds followed suit, their disciplined formation breaking for the first time. The man dropped to his knees just as Maximus reached him. In that moment, years of separation vanished. Maximus pressed his massive body against the man, his tail wagging furiously, his head nuzzling against him. The man, his owner, his handler, wrapped his arms around the dog, burying his face in his thick fur. "Oh, buddy," he choked out. "I thought I lost you." Emily covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The K9s hadn't just been surviving. They had been waiting for him. Ethan clung to his mother's side, his little heart swelling with emotion. "Mommy, they found their person," he said softly. Emily nodded, unable to speak. The man, his uniform jacket now visible, was a retired K9 officer. He pulled back just enough to stroke Maximus's head, his own eyes glassy with emotion. "I came back to check on this place one last time. I never thought I'd find you here." The shepherds, once fierce protectors, now surrounded their handler, tails wagging, bodies pressing close as if trying to make up for lost time. Emily's voice finally broke through. "You were their handler?" The man looked up at her and nodded. "Yeah, I trained them. I worked with them every day. And then when the station shut down, I had no choice but to leave them behind." His voice cracked. "I thought they were gone." Emily's heart clenched. "They never left," she whispered. The man looked down at Maximus, running a hand over his strong shoulders. "And they never forgot." For the first time in years, the K9s were home again. But one final decision still remained. What would happen next? Silence settled between them, heavy with emotion. Emily watched as a retired officer, his name still unknown to her, knelt among the K9 German shepherds, his hands running through their thick fur, his breath shaky. They had waited for him. They had never given up. Maximus, still pressed against the man's chest, let out a deep, contented sigh, almost as if a weight had lifted from his soul. The other shepherds wagged their tails, circling their handler, nudging him gently as if to make sure he was real. Emily swallowed hard, trying to push through the lump in her throat. Finally, she found her voice. "What happens now?" she asked softly. The man looked up, his expression torn between relief and guilt.